Welcome to another episode of Tech Society for all your tech and business analysis and other important topics that revolve around technology and modern society. Hosted by tech entrepreneurs and whiskey enthusiasts John Nguyen and Alex Dunmo.
And before we begin this episode, just quickly, is it time for your business to evolve? Yes, it is. So come see Ninja Software, njs.dev. All right, let's get into the episode.
Welcome to Tech Society on Leadership. Today we have Nick Marvin, a management consultant and business advisor. He has worked closely with famous entrepreneurs such as Andrew Forrester and Jack Bendit. And as the managing director of the Perth Wildcats, he was instrumental in transforming the organisation. We cover in this episode the future of live sports. How will sports fit in or compete with existing streaming services? How does the potential and growth of women's sport look in the near future? The organisational benefits that come from empowering your employees, and the 5 Fs, that is, faith, family, friends, fitness and finance, and how these can be used to improve the workplace. He also shares some insights into his book named Effort and what the value of hard work and humility can achieve. Let's dive in.
If you could start by just introducing yourself, what you're doing.
Hi, my name is Nick Marvin. Pleasure to join you on this podcast. Brief about myself. I was born and raised in India. I came to Melbourne when I was 18 years old and then moved to Perth when I was about 34 and have been here ever since. Spent most of my life in management consulting, really, focusing on turnaround management and growth. So organisations that are going through a difficult time and organisations that are going through growth, which sometimes can be a difficult time. And for about 11 or 12 years of that I spent in sport, mainly with the Perth Wildcats, with the National Basketball League, with the women's basketball team called the Perth Lynx here in Perth, and then more recently with the Western Force and Andrew Forrest's World Series Rugby. It's been a couple of years now that I've left sport behind and spending some time with different sized organisations.
Where did you go after the Wildcats?
Well, I wanted to get away from sport because I felt that you could get pigeonholed, and some would argue I still am. But I did some work at hockey. I really enjoyed my time at hockey. I think it's a wonderful sport, field hockey here in Australia. And then I was asked by Andrew Forrest, who was quite concerned with the unfairness of the way the Western Force, which is a rugby union team here in Western Australia, and the state they were in. Mm-hmm. And so initially our goal was to try to get them back into Super Rugby. Then it was, well, why don't we create our own competition? We called it the World Series Rugby. Played predominantly in Asia, and then, now thanks to COVID mainly, the Western Force are back in Super Rugby, and I think that's a great result.
So what's happened with the World Series?
Well, I think that's been put on hold again, unfortunately because of COVID, where it has affected mainly a lot of the Asian countries, particularly in sport, and it's made it almost impossible really to have a transatlantic or trans-Asian competition.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Which, I think it's been hard on all sports teams, right?
Well, I think sport worldwide has had to have a correction.
Yeah.
I think that when you have empty venues, it's a problem. Mm-hmm. You're relying on broadcast rights. Where is that going? There is a lot of movement with broadcast. There is a big movement, I think, coming where we're moving, in my opinion, we're moving away from free-to-air
to streaming services.
To what they call OTT, which is over the top. And we're starting to see Amazon and Stan, first movers, bring sport in. We saw Twitter broadcast live games. We partnered with Twitter during rugby to get a global audience. So all of this aggregation and consolidation is happening as we speak.
Yeah.
COVID is arguably fast-forwarding some of these conversations. Where does it go next? I think most of us are going to be watching content online rather than in the traditional satellite or free-to-air.
I mean, my TV is not even plugged into the wall.
Most people are in your shoes, so we're very much on demand. However, we want to bring live into on demand, and I think we'll see the Netflix, the Stans, the Primes, the binges, the Chaos of the world. Really, they're the ones that are going to be our broadcast partners for sport.
I'm surprised there hasn't been a aggregated sports version of Netflix, an actual service dedicated to sports.
Well, it's only a matter of time.
That's what I was thinking. Especially like F1, I think, has been pretty ahead in that.
Yeah,
they've always had a pretty rich streaming
and the UFC
presence.
live streams as well.
On
ESPN Plus.
Well, see, if you overlay those things, that's where the future is. You talk about the main event where you subscribe to a boxing match. Well, it's very transparent with OTT how much a sport is worth in real time. I mean, you could arguably have a sporting franchise or a sporting code that does a deal with a Stan or a Netflix that is purely based on eyeballs.
And suddenly becomes really popular.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the best things to come out of the whole Netflix experiment for me, is that sci-fi has done very well because Netflix is actually able to look at their numbers and go, hey, people watch a lot of sci-fi.
Yeah, it's true.
It's the old Star Treks have a lot of views, and so they started greenlighting more on sci-fi. And I think that could happen to sports where they've go, wow, curling's really popular. Let's do more curling.
And you can turn taps on and off. You can remunerate sporting codes based on eyeballs.
Yeah.
And that would allow the sporting codes to be more engaged with their audience and give them what they need. So the future is going to be quite amazing.
So I guess we just have to wait for the dinosaurs to let go of their long leases on these sports, right?
But now you've got demand-driven sport. So what happens to the sports that are not as popular? They'll just fade away into nothingness because no one wants to watch it.
Maybe they should.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to. The world is turning faster than we've ever known it.
Yes, right.
And we have to reinvent ourselves far more often than we've ever known to have done, as individuals, as organisations, and sports no different. I mean, one of the things that I learned in rugby was, and the first thing we did was go and see World Rugby and have the laws of rugby amended, which we were lucky enough to have World Rugby approve to improve the ball in game time. One of the big criticisms of rugby back then was that the ball was always in stoppage and the game became boring. Well, if we could do that 3-4 years ago, as we move to this new model, the sport will change to suit the audience. And I think that's a great thing, within reason.
It must be hard to convince a committee to change such a rule set of a worldwide game, though.
Yeah, that must have been.
Well, we as I said, we had a good argument, and we were lucky, and we had the.
What was the change you got?
Well, we did a few things. We created what we call a super goal, or I forget the actual name we came up with, where if your transition play was from the back of the rugby field, then you got more points, and so it made the game faster and more enjoyable. We sped up the scrums. That really does slow the game down. So 1, 2, okay, let's move on. We don't want to spend too much time.
I don't think scrums were invented for TV.
No,
because you're just like zooming in on some guy's butts, like just waiting for the ball to finally pop out. It's kind of boring for the audience.
Yeah, well, technically scrums are a great part of the game.
Yeah, of course.
But I think there needs to be some minor adjustments to make it, and we're seeing that in Super Rugby. We're seeing the movement. For those rugby fans, I apologise if you're not, but it is a beautiful
I was going to say,
game.
do you have to kind of fight against the purists who are like, that's not the original hundreds of years of rules?
Yeah, I think you do. I think there's always going to be reluctance for change. I mean, we all have that in ourselves, this concept of sticking to a routine. I remember in basketball, it was really a traumatic 6 months since in my first 6 months in 2009, where the critics were endless and everyone had a voice and an opinion, and most of them were how we were going to fail. you know, and there were letters about the squeaking of the sand shoes, I remember. That was so important to the purists. That was necessary, otherwise the game would disappear. And you know, people walked away because of the squeaking of the sand shoes. They wanted more than just the pure game. And so we had to...
That's amazing. Why would anyone care about that?
Well, that's the purists.
Yeah. I suppose you got the cricket now as well. What's it's faster than a one-dayer.
The 2020.
2020, yeah.
And again, you know, I grew up with Test cricket, and I remember when one-day cricket was an abomination to the game. But you learn to change, and 2020 has its audience and has its place, as does the 5-day game.
So what about the links? What about women's basketball? Like, do you see the audience becoming bigger for women's sports in general?
That's a great question. I think that there is room for women's sport. I think that it's long overdue. I mean, one of the joys of my career in sport was we were the first women's team where we paid the women a full-time wage.
Yeah.
And when we bought the license, it was something that I was really keen on making do. I had the support of our owner back then, Jack Bendat, who allowed it to happen, and I'm grateful to him for that. Because I don't think it is fair for someone to do the same work as someone else and not be paid for it as well. With one minor statement, and that is that it took a fair amount of time for men to move from amateur to professional.
Yeah.
And that cycle must happen with women's sport. Yes, we can speed it up, but we can't. We have to be careful about how we grow the game commercially.
It has to be organic.
With the frameworks necessary to fund it. Otherwise, it will collapse. And I think we've got to be careful that we want equality, and I am probably the greatest advocate and ambassador and for equality with women's sport. But we've got to get the fundamentals to go along with it. Now, I can tell you this, having worked with women and men. Women are great ambassadors, right? We know that it works with lipstick and the Kardashians. So it just needs to be, you just need to tweak the fundamentals to have the same happen with female athletes. And we have some superstar female athletes, whether it's women's AFL or women's basketball or women's hockey. I mean, there are some women who are great role models who most young girls would like to grow up to be. And there's no reason why someone who's of a high profile in sport is not marketing, forget about lipsticks and makeup, but pasta and
cereal
or a car or a career. You know, there's no reason why women aren't role models for engineers and computer professionals and CEOs and directors, and all of these are female athletes as well. So I believe they're very trustworthy when you compare the two, men and women. I think women would lean towards being more trustworthy brand. I'm generalizing here. I'm also generalizing that there are, certainly the science would argue, that less chances of having to deal with a problem ambassador with women athletes. They're more bankable. Without naming names, it's just really on the mats. I would argue that women are more bankable for a brand. So it's a matter of time. They have to mature. Their managers, their advocates have to mature. But I just see it happening, and I can't wait for it to happen sooner.
Yeah. So what are you doing now? Where are you now?
Well, trying to move away from being the guy that's known as the turnaround guy in sport. And I have a small consulting practice where we primarily focus on two things, really. One of them is is this pursuit of goodness. And I know it seems airy-fairy, but we think that there is a real need, not just in the corporate landscape, but in the landscape, the social landscape, where we pay more or as much attention at least to how things are done, to what is being achieved. I think we're missing that point, and I would like to spend the rest of my life changing the dial on that. And more importantly, this concept where we want to get people to perform to their strengths, to perform to their greatest potential. And they're the two lessons I learned in sport, and I'm trying to take that to the corporate world, where we're trying to get people to better engage with their people. We want to change the narrative from particularly managers saying, my business will be great if I didn't have people.
If people actually say that?
Yeah, our people are the business. I mean,
we hear that so often in the real
crazy.
world.
If only I could automate everyone.
I mean, I have heard, I'd love to do business if I didn't have to work with my clients.
Well, that too, and for us, we argue the opposite. We love people, we love clients. We think
it's the point, right?
Well,
if you don't want to do those two things, don't go to business. Just trade stocks or something.
Absolutely, create an AI algorithm.
Yeah,
but the human potential is so fascinating, and so it's so rewarding to be able to get someone and find their strengths and empower them, give them the information they need to do their job, and get them to work to their potential, and to say to them, don't worry about your weaknesses, whatever they are, within reason. We'll find someone in the team who can complement your weaknesses.
That's really powerful, because that was one of my lessons. In my journey of maturing, I'm still not mature, but in my journey of maturing, was stop trying to make my weaknesses strengths.
Yeah.
They never would be. They'd still continue being mediocre. Focus on my strengths. A lot of people want to work on their weaknesses. And I think that's a waste of effort and potential, and that's where you should be collaborating, right?
Oh, absolutely. And that's the power of teams. When you're on your own, you're stuck with your strengths and your weaknesses, and you're as strong as your weaknesses.
Yeah.
But not when you're in a team. When you're in a team, your weaknesses, given good managers and leaders and coaches, become irrelevant.
Yeah.
You are playing to your strengths. And we want to encourage this model. We want to help people understand it better and use it in the workplace.
So how do you respond to someone who says, I love my business apart from my team?
Well,
people.
we try to share with them and get them to go through this journey of hope, of the power of the human potential. And most people love that journey and understand it once we encourage them to work with us through it and changing mindsets, because it is quite powerful.
Yeah.
It really is the secret of success is to get people to perform to their strengths.
So you took the things you learnt in the sports world. When you look at the Wildcats, and it's a team of guys who have to work well together, and while they may not all be superstars, together they can be, right? And now you apply that lesson to offices and departments, right?
Well, that's the joy of sport. I often say that there's two things about sport that make life very different to the workplace, is that you can constantly validate different things.
Yeah.
And they could be minor things. Most people on the team, on the organization, may not even know we're making certain tweaks, but you can validate a lot of this stuff. And that was the enjoyable part of sport. And so I certainly learned a lot about engagement, empowerment, and how to get people functioning in teams. And we've pulled that into the corporate environment. Things like conflict and communication, and how we need to encourage that.
Yeah.
As difficult as it may be, we like to use the word candor rather than conflict, but to be able to call something out. We most of us want to get along. We want to be liked, and quite often on teams, wherever those teams are, whether it's your family, your husband, your wife, the workplace, a sporting team, we tend to put this desire to be liked and the desire to get along above
everything.
the need to rectify a problem. And so we say, no, we've got to stop doing that. We must encourage candor. I much rather my wife told me 25 years ago how she hates that I don't put the dishes in the dishwasher than in the sink. Than to leave it for 25 years, and then there's an argument about something completely irrelevant, you know, and then she says, oh, well, and
For 25 years
I've
you've been doing this.
You know, and so why wait? Why wait? You know, and in the workplace, of course I jest here, but in the workplace, it's the behaviors we walk past.
Yeah.
And we used to have a saying that it's the first straw on the camel's back, not the last straw. You know, look out for the first straw. For what is this first aberration? This first sense of we're deviating from true north. Well, let's address it right now. Let's be empathetic, let's be authentic, but let's be inquisitive and say, you know, John, what is really going on? This behavior of yours is not like you. It's not what we do around here. You know, those beautiful, powerful words, we don't do this around here.
Yeah.
So what's going
Like
on
that.
in your life? What's affecting you to say these things and do it this way? Let's address it early and avoid putting it away. Then the rest of the team starts to put up with it, and then they hate it, and now it's a toxic environment.
Yeah.
Well, let's nip these things in the bud.
Before they get there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
On the topic of candor, it's actually quite interesting that you mentioned candor instead of conflict. Is there an effective way to encourage candor amongst team members as opposed to management identifying it, but actually encouraging everyone on the grounds?
Like as a culture.
Yeah, a culture of not calling each other out, but actually being direct about their problems.
I think that that is a terrific question. And one of the things that I failed to mention during this conversation is that we start with the human being. Now, we've come up with 5 things, and it can be any 5, but as a broad rule, we've said, okay, let's get to know you on 5 things. Let's talk about faith or religion or spirituality or mindfulness. And where do you sit on that? What about family? What about friends? What about fitness or health? And what about finance? We call it the 5 Fs. You can change it up. But it forces people to say, let's really get to know each other. Now, when you and I are working on a team and you and I understand each other on those 5 dimensions or anything like it, we have a genuine empathy and relationship. And when we have that, it's okay to call things out. It's okay to say, you know, Alex, I love you like a brother, but what's going on here? Or Nick, you know, we've been friends, or I really have your best interests at heart. But stop doing that if you can, you know, and because it's really triggering everyone in the office. And let's chat about it. It's okay to chat about it, because maybe I can share with you that I'm going through a really difficult patch right now. You know, and normally I don't bring my stuff to work, but this week it's been tough. And okay, well, give Nick a break this week. Guys, he's going through a tough patch. We will hold him accountable next week. But let's cut him some slack this week.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's cool.
We have a copy here of your
Yes.
your kids' book.
Ah,
Effort.
Effort. Yeah.
Effort by Nick Marvin.
Yeah. Can you speak to this a bit? What prompted you to make this, and what was the tell us the story of Effort.
okay. Well, firstly, it's free on my website. If you don't want to buy it, you can download it for free. So the National Basketball League was in crisis. Midway through this turnaround of the Perth Wildcats, the league's in crisis. And as a reluctant person, I got asked to help turn this around. And so part of the job was to work with Basketball Australia to buy the league and privatise it. And then part of the job was to go and raise money from the market to fund the league. And so I was working as the managing director of the Perth Wildcats, and I really didn't want this job with the National Basketball League, but there's no one else to do it, and so
step up.
I was asked to do it. So I was playing this dual role as chairman of the league, and it meant I was away for 42, 43 weeks a year. Where I could, I would take a child with me, but I couldn't always.
Yeah.
I have taken kids into very difficult National Basketball League meetings where they're out there, because we homeschool our kids. So, my son's out there doing homework while there's this tumultuous meeting of all the clubs, fond memories. But I felt it was a very difficult year. It was probably the only year where I broke my own rules about quantity time at home and quality time at work. And so I was quite upset about it. And during my travels, I thought I would write a book to my son.
Yeah.
And so I wrote this book for him about the lesson that talent is irrelevant for the main part, and that it's about hard work. And so this book's about effort. It's about this unlikely young man who's the water boy of a basketball team, and how hard work pays off in the end. It's a great story. If you want to download it, read it to your kids.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Again, out of luck, it's being used quite a lot in Indonesia.
Really?
As a reading text for people learning English. So we ship out a whole heap of books every year to Indonesia as a reader for English.
Yeah.
So it does do some additional good as well.
That's fantastic.
That's an unexpected one.
Yep.
Yeah, very cool.
That's really cool though, that you had a I guess a sentimental reason to write it, and you saw it through to actually getting it published. And
well, there are a few people at the Wildcats who I need to thank, who helped me finish it, editing it and putting I was lucky my EA at the time was a school teacher by trade, and so she could get the whole thing to work quite well.
You said a really interesting nugget of wisdom there. It was really quick, but you said quantity of time at home and quality time at work.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, some of the rules of life that I try to encourage people to understand is that sometimes we lose our true north. That really, if we were smart, we would make the time we spend working to be qualitative wherever we can, and we would spend quantity time with our wives and kids or husbands, because kids don't understand that they've got 30 minutes. It's the second day of a bushwalk that my son actually tells me how he's going.
Right.
It's the second hour of doing something with the kids in the garden where they go, right? Or doing something together over time. So I think we sometimes have it misplaced. And the corollary to that, and this is just as important, is that we are replaceable at work, but we are irreplaceable at home.
Good point.
And quite often we get it wrong. We feel that because this thing screams out with a text or a buzz or a noise, we start paying attention to this, and we fail to hear the whimpers of the 7-year-old in the bath that wants to be read a book. Or the 6-year-old that needs you to shoot some hoops, or the 12-year-old that wants to talk about a difficult day at school. Because this is screaming at you, it's got colours and bright lights and sounds and vibrations, and we fail these whimpers, and over time we get out of bed and go, wow, she's 16, she's got a license, and I don't see her anymore.
Yeah.
Well, she doesn't need you anymore. When she needed you, where were you, We really only needed between birth and about 16 or 15 or 13. After that, they're independent. So I think it's important that we add value where we can.
So, I mean, you've had a really successful career, and you've obviously done a lot of hard work. How did you balance that?
Well, I've been blessed. I've got a wife that complements me.
Yeah.
We decided early we'd homeschool all the children.
Yep.
For lots of reasons. And so there was quantity time anyway. Where I travelled in the early days, I used to be able to take a child with me because I had so many points. And my hotel room, I'm not going to sleep on my own. If I took a kid with me, it was great. I had a bit of company. But wherever I could, I would bring them along. I think it's actually okay to work with your kids. I don't mind that. Some people say they don't want to, but I think working with your kids is very different to being on the phone when you're having dinner. I think checking Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram or Twitter when you're spending time with your kids is very different to saying, hey, I'm working on this, and bring them into the story. And so some of that has helped. And we have some rituals that we do together that we don't break. And rituals are easy to keep once you make them habits.
We actually end on a whimsical question
Yeah.
every episode. I don't know how familiar you are with wrestling or UFC, but when the fighters come out, the lights go down, smoke machine starts, and their intro song plays, which is meant to, kind of inform the audience as to the character that they are. What is Nick Marvin's intro song?
Oh yes, there's a Jimmy Barnes song that I remember we used to play as our intro for the Wildcats. Gonna have a good time tonight, but
Nice.
Excellent.
and for many years we rolled with that, and that for me is like, hey, there's nothing wrong in being joyful
Yeah.
and having fun, especially if you do what is good. Yeah.
Excellent.
Perfect.
Thank
I love that. That's an excellent answer.
Cheers.
All right.
Alright,
Thank you
thanks,
very
Nick.
much. Yeah.
you.
You've made it to the end of another episode of Tech Society. Well, that was a great episode. I hope you enjoyed that as much as we enjoyed making it. Make sure you hit us up on Twitter @Tech Society, head over to the website, subscribe to the newsletter.